So the authors of John, to me, paint a really complex and honest picture of who he is. He's not only reluctant to have Jesus crucified, but he's conflictedly set against it. In John 18:29 to 31, we talked about this last week, he asks about the charge, and he's putting forward that it's legally thin, the justification for the charge. And he outright tells the people that bringing Jesus for condemnation, he won't do it. So he gets pushback for making further inquiry as to what this is all about. And they brought him on charges of blasphemy, but Pilate is inquiring about treason because there's nothing in the Roman criminal code about blaspheming the Jewish God. So in John 18:33 to 37, Jesus and Pilate have a discourse about the kingdom and kingship of Jesus that he's accused of. And I do think he does in some places, but I don't necessarily know that the intention was to be masterfully skillful about skirting Pilate's questions. Could be. But I think that he's really clarifying who he is and what he's about. So again, it's this epistemic and relational kingdom or mission. That's what is being brought about. And not to be anachronistic about it, but I think that maybe it might have come across as the kingdom of Narnia to Pilate. You know what I mean? In terms of how he's trying to square it in his mind. So the discourse in this section ends with Jesus telling Pilate that he came to testify to the truth, and this is a legal term. And it ends with Pilate asking, what is the truth? How is he asking what is the truth? That's what I want to know. Is he being sarcastic? What is the truth? Or is there a distinctive earnestness in the face of this encounter with Jesus to try and understand the truth? So is he passionate? Is this a passionate reality for Pilate to grasp and uphold? Is this a moment, I wonder, like it was for Nicodemus, when he comes face to face with Jesus and his worldview begins to crack? There's so much we don't know. I'm taking a lot of liberties in the sermon about trying to figure out what this particular scene was and what's happening. But everybody who has ever encountered Jesus that we know of in these Gospels comes away changed in some particular way. So the very next reality within that same verse is asking about the truth is Pilate proclaiming to the accusers, I find no case against him. So to me, it seems he's trying to help by asking if he should release him. So those present cry out that they want Barabbas instead. And in some translations, Barabbas is a bandit, he's a rebel, or he's a freedom fighter. So the authors of John tell us that Pilate had Jesus flogged. And this was interesting to me that some scholars argue that the flogging was actually an act of mercy. Doesn't make sense when you first hear that. But the rationale is that the flogging would have weakened his life significantly so that if he did go to the cross, he wouldn't have suffered for as long. It's an interesting thought. I don't know. We know that the flogging was a common occurrence, but we can't really know what was in the mind of Pilate ever. Again, this is the liberty I'm taking, but contextually it makes sense, and I'll point that out in a moment. But it veers from that a little bit when the mercy slips away when soldiers are dressing Jesus in royal robes and a painful crown and on his head and slapping him and mocking him, calling him the King of the Jews. But in John 19:5 seems to want us to see that Pilate has allowed this to demonstrate perhaps that sufficient punishment has been rendered. We've beat him to a pulp and mocked him, but we find no case against him. Painful. He presents Jesus, ecce homo, here's the man, but these authorities are still out for blood. And he tells them to take him themselves and crucify him. And in verse 7 points to the bee in their bonnet that this is really about blasphemy, that he is claimed to be the Son of God. Now something happens for Pilate in this claim, because in verse 8 it says that when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. And the word for afraid in the original Greek, I'm not going to try and do it, is is afraid in the sense that we know, but there's also a hint of awe in it. It's a fear that comes with awe. So I am trying to make an argument that I think Pilate has been transformed in some way by what's happening here. And I've never really thought about maybe what has happened for Pilate in this encounter. So, yeah, I wonder if Pilate's heart was shaken by this meeting. So they go back into the house for more questioning. And this is interesting because Pilate is not only the judge, but now he's the defense in some ways. You see that starting to play out. But I really want to highlight this next conversation because Pilate's asking him where he comes from, and Jesus just remains silent. And typically, the bunny trail that I've heard preachers go down with this piece is about power and power differential and struggle, right? Pilate says he has the power to free Jesus or to crucify him, and Jesus says that you haven't any power unless God has given it to you to do this. So the usual line of thinking is that God is the ruler of this world, not Pilate. But I wonder if we read this discourse with desperation, if perhaps we can't see Pilate actually trying to save Jesus. Don't you know if you tell me that I could save you right now? Help me out here. This is just one angle. Take it with a grain of salt. But here's what's amazing to me. Jesus then says, the one who handed me over to you has committed the greater sin. The one who has handed you over to me has created the greater sin. Is that a word of comfort? I wonder, after being flogged and slapped and mocked, is Jesus comforting Pilate's distress, this tension that he's caught between? Is he saying, this isn't on you, Pilate, this is on the one who betrayed me? Mercy for the judge? I don't know. It's an interesting thought. And it's on brand for Jesus, I think. I mean, this is our God. So in verse 12, then Pilate tried to release him, but these authorities blackmailed him. If you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against Caesar. Thus, Pilate now is caught in a double bind, and he's trapped into coercion. And in all that, it gives us about 5 clear attempts in this passage where Pilate tries to save Jesus. We could say 6 if we count the flogging as a sort of calculated effort to prevent his prolonged crucifixion. I feel like maybe that's a stretch, but there it is. And so all of this to me paints to Pilate not necessarily as neutral, but as a conflicted figure who keeps trying and failing to get Jesus off the hook. What has happened for Pilate in this interaction? I have so many questions, and maybe it's not fair to ask questions in a sermon without answers, but here they are. I wonder if we're seeing this as a theological drama where every character, Roman and religious alike, is caught in some pattern of fear and power and self-protection in the face of truth. Are we seeing this narrative strategy where Pilate's hesitation exposes not Roman innocence, but universal tendency to evade responsibility when truth becomes costly? We've talked about that over the last couple of weeks. Are we seeing this as a community under pressure, shaping its story in a way that both distances itself from certain Jewish authorities and navigates survival within the Roman Empire? Are we seeing this because the authors of John are writing in a world where tension between Jews and Romans is highly tense? And I have a question if maybe because the Jewish characters in this narrative are not coming out in the best light, but this Roman character somehow is. And what is that about? I don't know. Anyway, here's an interesting aside, or actually an important aside. One of the things I think we need to be mindful of is how easily this passage can be read through an anti-Semitic lens. And that's a big thing that Christianity has to do a lot of work around in terms of repairing those relationships. So in the Gospel of John, when it says the Jews, hoi eudaioi, I'm better at Hebrew, trust me, usually mean all Jewish people. But scholars are saying that this is a shorthand for the particular Judean authorities, especially the chief priests and the police in this context. So that's why some modern translations and commentaries try to narrow the meaning in context, even if they keep the original wording. So while the original Greek doesn't say these particular Jews, there's a strong case that it's meant something closer to those particular leaders or opponents, not the Jewish people as a whole. So who killed the Jews? The Romans. The Romans killed the Jews, who orchestrated the trial. Specific authorities of that region who happened to be Jewish is a better way to view this. Anyway, all that to say, it's important to name it so we don't misread the text in harmful ways. But it also helps us to return to what John is showing us about Pilate. And I think there are quite a few things that we're seeing about Pilate that are interesting to me as a Bible nerd. So across the trial in the Gospel of John, Pilate repeatedly names Jesus as innocent and makes real attempts to release him. So he's not blind and he's not purely malicious. He sees enough to know that this is unjust. And there's even a hint that he's unsettled, maybe even shaken, especially after the piece about the Son of God. His perspective seems to be open a little bit. And then he's also constrained politically, socially, personally. And when the pressure sharpens to that threat that you're no friend of Caesar, he folds. So John doesn't give us a cartoon villain, I don't think necessarily. He gives us something more uncomfortable, which is just a person who moves toward truth, but ultimately chooses self-preservation over justice. And that's where our reading really lands, I think, because Pilate's caught in coercion, yes, but he still participates. He tries to save Jesus, but not at the cost of himself. And John presents Pilate as conflicted and even sympathetic, but in the end, he chooses safety over doing what is right. So the way that John paints Pilate in the Gospel of John isn't mainly about a distant Roman governor. It's about a very familiar pattern, I think. Seeing clearly and still not acting when it costs us too much. And most of us aren't in positions like Pilate, but the dynamic shows up in smaller everyday ways, I think. We recognize something isn't right at work, in church, in a friendship, in a system, but we hesitate. Not because we're cruel, but because we're weighing the consequences. Reputation, relationships, stability, safety, all of that stuff. That quiet calculation, what will this cost me if I speak or act, is where the tension really lives. What's uncomfortable is that Pilate isn't ignorant. He names the truth more than once, and he even tries in limited ways to move toward it. But when the pressure becomes personal, when it threatens his standing, he hands responsibility off and lets the moment pass. And that's the part that echoes for me. This isn't so much a case of outright evil as it is about compromised courage. So there's something here about coercion. Pilate is pressured, even trapped to a degree, and I think that matters a lot because people today are often caught in systems that are limiting their freedom to act cleanly, but John doesn't let that erase responsibility. It complicates it. Pilate is both constrained and is accountable. So the question it presses on us isn't just, are we good or bad? I think it's sharper than that. Where do we really see what's right, and where are we still choosing what's safer? And what would it look like, even in small ways, to hold on to truth when it starts to cost us something? So this isn't about being villains. I think it's about those moments where we know better and still pull back, and whether we're willing to push through that next time. So in moments when truth is clear, the real danger isn't not knowing, it's choosing safety over courage. Sin isn't just wrongdoing, it's the quiet refusal to act when we already know what's right. So what does God do with people like Pilate and people like us? 3 things. First, I notice Jesus' posture towards Pilate. I've already pointed out that Jesus doesn't condemn Pilate in that moment. He doesn't escalate it. If anything, he seems to de-escalate Pilate's guilt by saying, the one who handed me over to you has committed the greater sin. And maybe we can lean into that as a glimpse of grace. Even in the middle of injustice, even towards someone complicit in his suffering, Jesus isn't operating from retribution. He's still orienting towards mercy. The heart of God, even when we fail, is not to crush us, but to meet us. Second, in this narrative, I think that grace names the truth without abandoning the person. So Pilate isn't left off the hook in John, but he's also not reduced to the worst decision. He's seen in his complexity, and that alone is grace shaping the story. So God sees us clearly, including the places we choose safety over courage, and doesn't walk away and doesn't leave us there. Grace tells the truth about us without giving up on us. And the third and final thing is that grace creates another chance beyond the moment of failure. So Pilate's story freezes in the decision. but ours doesn't have to. So what if the point isn't just don't be like Pilate? What if it is when you recognize the Pilate in you, that's not the end of the story? So within the Christian imagination, failure isn't final. There's always a next moment to choose differently, to tell the truth, to act with courage in a smaller, quieter way. I guess I'm saying that grace doesn't mean that you're stuck in the worst version of yourself. Yes, we're capable of seeing truth and still choosing safety. Yes, that matters and it has consequences. But also, yes, God is not waiting on the other side of that failure with condemnation, but with invitation. So we're people who, like Pilate, sometimes see clearly and still step back. And we're people whom Christ meets us in the exact place, not to shame us, but to draw us forward again into courage, into truth, and into life.